Hello everyone, welcome to the latest edition of the Devon Education Services Safeguarding Team podcasts. Today I'm really lucky to have Jenny Harris join me to discuss the Adolescent Safety Framework, specifically looking at the peer context approach, including the Peer Context Conference. Thank you for joining me again today, Jenny. This is the second podcast in our series, so most of you listeners would already know you. However, I think it'd be really helpful if you could just introduce yourselves again for any new listeners.
Hi, Caroline, and thank you for having me back again. I'm really pleased to have the opportunity to talk about peer group approaches as part of wider contextual safeguarding. So just to introduce myself, I'm one of the managers in the REACH team, which is Devon County Council's missing and exploitation team. And I'm also one of the operational leads on the development and the implementation of the Adolescent Safety Framework in Devon.
Lovely. Thank you so much for that overview, Jenny. I think it'd be really helpful for us to just remind settings what the Adolescent Safety Framework is and why we introduced a specific framework to consider contextual risks for our children.
Yeah, absolutely. So the Adolescent Safety Framework was launched back in December 2019. And essentially, it's designed to support contextual safeguarding approaches with our young people across the Devon area. It's underpinned by research and development from the University of Bedfordshire and recognises a number of key principles. So, firstly, adolescents are very much in a unique stage of development, and that's socially, emotionally, and physiologically. So, our work with adolescents need to consider this as we seek to understand how and why young people think, feel, and behave in the way that they do. Secondly, we recognise that adolescents interact with and are part of a number of different contexts. So, as well as being part of a family, they may also be part of a peer group or a school community or a community within the town or the village where they live. And within those contexts, both risk and safety may be present. And by only focusing our work on the young person and their family, we're actually missing opportunities to address risk and increase safety within the other contexts a young person is part of. And thirdly, harm doesn't just happen in the home. So, irrespective of where that harm takes place, the impact on young people can be as detrimental as any other form of abuse. So, given all of this, as a partnership in Devon, we opted to create a framework for practice that supported both the responses to individual children through their individual plans, but also mechanisms to understand and intervene in the key context where harm can take place. And in Devon, we've put this into three context categories, and that would be peer groups, schools, and then finally community or neighbourhood contexts.
Lovely. Thank you, Jenny. That's really helpful. So our previous podcast, we looked specifically at the school context element of the Adolescent Safety Framework. And I think it'd be really useful for school settings if we could spend some time to consider the peer context approach. So what is the purpose of a peer context element of the Adolescent Safety Framework?
Yes, absolutely. I think it's really important that we sort of look at this in more detail. So we know that peer relationships are a huge part of any young person's world. And through those relationships can come comfort, support, knowledge, learning, fun, opportunity. The list goes on. But also there can be negative influence within those peer associations and relationships, and at time harm. So the peer group approach essentially is aiming to understand risk and strength within an identified peer group and how this impacts upon the young people who form part of that group. So the intention is that this informs interventions in and around the group to increase safety and reduce risk for the young people that are within that context. So in essence, the group as a unit becomes the subject of the assessment and intervention. I think it's important to sort of identify that it should sit alongside any individual support plans for individual young people, and it doesn't replace those individual plans. Instead, it should be complementary.
Okay, lovely. Thank you, Jenny. So when would an education setting be completing a Safer Me assessment? So the peer group section, which I think is section 2, and what type of information would they need to submit?
So we'd advise education settings to use the peer group section of the Safe Me assessment if they have exploitation related concerns within a specific peer group. So basically we're saying that the harm and the negative influence is peer on peer. So, for example, if there were concerns around young people sexually exploiting each other within a group of friends, or young people coercing or influencing each other within their friendship group to be involved in selling drugs, then this is when we would be sort of suggesting the peer group section of the Safe for Me assessment. And really, the purpose is to support some initial thinking about what's going on in that peer group and what factors that might be present. And the assessment then is looking to obtain clarity or seek clarity on what the specific risks are, but also seeks to understand the sort of broader themes like the dynamics of the group, whether there are followers or leaders, how the young people look out for each other and create safety for each other, whether they've got a group identity, and whether there's any wider influences around risk and safety within the group, such as which the sort of the locations and the environment in which that group spends time, the level of parental involvement, community guardianship, trusted relationships. And it's also and through this, it's really, really important that we are engaging parents in conversations around the safety of young people within peer groups. And basically all of these come together to form sort of the key elements of the assessment and lead us to our decision making and working towards a plan around how we respond. I think it is just, yeah, I think, sorry, just to sort of go on a little bit from there as well. I think what I do want to say is if an education provision is highlighting or aware of a particular adult of concern who may be exploiting multiple young people, then the peer group conference approach isn't the appropriate mechanism. And what we'd be asking our education settings to do would be to follow statutory safeguarding processes and be liaising directly with children's social care.
Okay, great. Thanks, Jenny. Okay, so what next? Schools have completed the peer group section of the Safe for Me assessment. They have identified those vulnerabilities. So what do they do now? Would they be expected to hold a peer context conference, or would that be called by someone else?
So the first thing to think about is whether the young people identified have the relevant individual support or safeguarding plans in place, and this being dependent on their individual needs and levels of risk. So remember, the peer group approach doesn't replace those individual safeguarding pathways, it should complement them, and the individual responses must be prioritised by the education setting first. But if through the Safe For Me assessment, the information gathered around the peer group indicates risk of harm through exploitation within that group, then the education setting should be looking to submit information as a referral for a peer group conference. And this would involve them sending the Safe For Me assessment to the exploitation hub via MASH, making it really clear that this is for a peer group conference referral. What we'll also sort of highlight is that the expectation is the education setting will do everything they can to obtain consent from the parents for any of the young people they name in that group. What we shouldn't be doing is pulling vast amounts of information around young people and personal information and looking to formulate plans without the knowledge and where possible the involvement of those parents. So it's really thinking about parents as safeguarding partners. Now, we appreciate this is tricky to navigate when you're sort of looking to refer a whole peer group in. But we do need to make sure we are ensuring the confidentiality of the individual young people. So what we can't do is start talking to parents about other people's children. What I will say, though, is that parents and carers will most likely already have concerns about what their child is doing within their friendship group and will know exactly who it is that they're hanging around with. So there wouldn't be a requirement and we wouldn't be wanting you to disclose any of those other children's details to those parents. And again, I think it's worth noting when the referral goes in via MASH that the MASH will not be triaging those individual children. If you think MASH need to consider any of the individual children in their own right, then you must complete separate inquiries for those. What happens from here is the Safe For Me assessment will go through to the exploitation hub where it will be triaged to determine whether a peer group conference is required. And if one is required, the exploitation hub will set up a mapping meeting. And that will take place within 10 working days of that referral being agreed. And the exploitation hub will invite the relevant professionals, including the education provision, to that mapping activity. And then the peer group conference itself will be set up a further 5 working days after the mapping meeting, and that will be done by children's social care. And again, invites will be sent out to the relevant professionals to attend, including the relevant education provisions. So schools don't need to worry about the organisation of those meetings at all. Both of these types of meetings will be held virtually via Teams and will be chaired by children's social care.
Okay, thank you. So what other ways may a peer context approach be initiated, and would education settings be invited to peer context conferences?
So the process that I've just outlined is the only route to initiate a peer group conference formally through the Adolescent Safety Framework. And yeah, absolutely, is that the relevant education providers would be invited to both the mapping meetings and the peer group conferences themselves. If for any reason the referral doesn't meet threshold for a peer group conference through the ASF because the concerns are at a much lower level, then there is no reason that, with consent of the parents, the school can't hold their own multi-agency meeting using the same approach. They can still apply the model. However, social care and the exploitation hub wouldn't be involved in facilitating this meeting. And what we'd be saying in those circumstances, it's absolutely critical that the school would make sure that there is clear information governance in place with information sharing protocols, and that there is the ability to accurately record and store records. There is also worth considering the MACE. So it might be, if it's sort of those lower level concerns that doesn't require that full blown multi-agency meeting around the peer group, that a discussion in MACE might be more appropriate. But what I will do is sort of reassure education colleagues listening to this is that if a referral doesn't meet the criteria for a peer group conference, then they would absolutely be given advice and support about where they could go with it next.
Great, thank you. What should education settings expect if they are invited to a peer context conference?
Okay, so we would be expecting education settings to come with information regarding the identified young people in that group that attend their provision. So the meeting will be multi-agency, and there'll be a representative from each of the key agencies that have contact with some or all of the peer group members. And we'll also invite the lead professional for each young person to the meeting as well. Whilst in that meeting, the details of the individual support plans are not the topic of discussion, the chair will seek reassurance from lead practitioners that there is a plan in place for each of the young people named. But essentially, the meeting will set out the initial concerns around the group and what the additional insight the mapping activity has provided, particularly around the structure, the membership of the group, the intelligence picture around that group of young people. And this will all inform discussion to understand the relationships, the interactions, and the behaviour in that group that impact on safety and risk for the young people. And we'll also be considering any links to locations or possible adults of concern to make sure we're thinking about any wider influences on that group. And the meeting uses all of this information to come up with a multi-agency plan of intervention, which primarily focuses on how we increase safety across the group, or we disrupt any of the concerning behaviours and relationships that are taking place between peers.
Okay, great, thank you. So once the peer context conference has been held, how often will the group meet, and will the meetings continue until all the concerns have been removed?
So generally, the peer group conference, they tend to reconvene every 6 to 8 weeks, but it does very much depend on the specific risks identified and the dynamic nature of that particular peer group's activity. The meetings will cease at the point where there's either no clear ongoing exploitation risk within the group, or there is sustainable support in place that's effectively managing that risk.
Okay, perfect, thank you. So in your experience, what type of support have you seen being put in place during these types of sort of peer context conference meetings?
Do you know what? It's been fantastic. I mean, the types of interventions have been really varied across the county, and that's really sort of in the context of a reality where resourcing for contextual interventions is actually quite limited, particularly as most services are set up to work on an individual level with young people. But we've had some absolutely fantastic examples of collaborative working across the partnership. And that's included youth outreach from our space colleagues. We've had youth centres focusing on specific themes of work and diversionary activities in their centres. We've had targeted group work with young people in schools. We've had training delivered to school staff. We've had parenting support groups for parents of those young people identified within the group. And then also at the other end, we've had disruption through the use of ASB escalations and even at times bail conditions.
Brilliant. Thank you. This has been really helpful. Thank you so much for your time. Is there any other information that you think that is helpful or relevant for settings to know when they're considering if they should undertake a peer context assessment or if they are invited to a peer context conference?
No, I don't think so. I suppose it's just to let people know that there is a wealth of information on the DCFP website that education colleagues can access, and I'm always happy to be contacted directly for an informal discussion, or if anybody needs any advice or support about what to expect or what to do.
Brilliant, lovely. Thank you so much for your time, Jenny. I really think that education settings are going to find this information really helpful. Don't forget, everyone, this is podcast number 2 in the series all about the Devon Adolescent Safety Framework. For more information on the school context approach, check out our first podcast, which can already be found on the Devon Education Services Safeguarding Team website. We are going to produce 2 more podcasts like this over the next few months to give settings more information on the Safer Me process and also on the neighbourhood context approach. So please just watch this space. Further information, including the links to the Adolescent Safety Framework on the DCFP website and contact details for key people, can be found within this podcast. Thank you very much for your time. We hope you found this useful. See you soon.